Last night, we discussed how midnight seemed to be a sort of phoenix rising from the ashes of perceived organizational dysfunction, along with being the introduction of this new technology involved in a Generation 4 blockchain. But today, it feels like that was actually an understatement. We actually understated the significance of what's going on here. Today, it feels more like midnight is really a wholesale relaunch of the Cardano network with the integration of all that new technology and a lot of lessons learned from the years in Cardano. It seems like Charles is really digging deep in the well, going all the way back to the basics, so much so that the other night you asked for a whiteboard 2.0, a brand new whiteboard video, like the original one that got so many of us into Cardano, a brand new whiteboard video for midnight. And today, it looks like we're actually getting it. If you're as excited as I am to find out if Whiteboard 2.0 does for Midnight what Whiteboard 1.0 did for Cardano, or if you're finding value in these videos, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies DRep address and the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. All right, everybody, thanks for joining. Who we got here? D-Not U is here. Says like is already smashed. Thank you. J. Marie is here. J. Marie says everything on the first whiteboard video has come true. Let's go. Let's go. Hilldog, thank you for saying that. Thanks for being here. Cabaret Voltaire. Yeah, you should watch the first whiteboard video. I think it's an important part of the history of Cardano for sure. Jordan for America says, probably not going to make the live show. We'll listen on my commute to the fiat mines. Fair enough. You know, we all gotta be fiat mining in one way or another sometimes for sure. Hilldog says it's gonna be too late, but man, I love these nightly meetups. I hope you guys are delegating to AOS. I delegated my mom's pool and others. Show some love. Thank you so much for saying that. I appreciate it very much. Cardano for the win says good morning to everyone. Jonathan Wagner says this should be a good one. Yeah, I think I think we've got some important things to talk about. Fly over me says, gentlemen, start your engines. We're going to talk about that. Jonathan Wagner's here. We got him. Fly over me. Daniil Wiggins, thank you for joining. Daniil, good to see you. Mission Zambia is here. Thank you for joining. Mission Zambia. We are going to talk about Delta DeFi and Hydra. That is on the list. Neo Chad says, let's go. Let's go. Pucky Hawk says, I made it. I was all wrapped up in learning a new program. Oh, okay, fun. Pinto Camp says, hey, we shall all away. Post haste. Yes. Let's do that. Seth says, I don't care what people say. AOS videos are a bull market indicator. Thank you for saying that. Pucky, yep. Let's see. Marco's here. Let's go, Marco. Thanks for joining. Frazak, thanks for joining. All right. Jose Cano, thanks for being here. Highly unlikely. What's up? Thank you for joining. Everybody, thank you for being here. So it's this whole midnight launch thing is turning into, I think it's becoming something a lot bigger than a lot of us realized it was going to be. Like, you know, obviously it's been obvious for a long time. Charles was putting on, and Augie, you know, of course, we're putting in a lot of energy into midnight. And, you know, I was sort of thinking of midnight as like, okay, this is probably going to be, you know, a very nice addition to Cardano. But then as we've gotten this very, very candid version of Cardano recently, good evening, Brian Packard, we've it's become a lot more apparent that this is a not just a significant add-on to Cardano, not just a big focus for Charles. It seems like this is a reignition of what Charles originally wanted to do in Cardano. It's like we talked last night about how organizationally things kind of went awry. Things haven't worked out organizationally, you know, from Charles's perspective, the way he would have liked, you know, specifically his IOG's relationship with the CF and what the CF is capable and willing of doing. None of those things worked out for the reasons we talked about last night. But it's like, it's not like Charles is just like laying down and accepting that. He instead, what he did was created a whole new blockchain, albeit, labeled to us as a partner chain, but it is, in a lot of ways, it is a brand new blockchain. And, obviously the Midnight Foundation is the foundation in Midnight. There is no CF. There is no CF in Midnight. There's not really CF involvement in Midnight, not in the same way, of course, that there was CF involvement in Cardano. So it is like a brand new. Hola, Rulo. Thank you for joining. Thank you for joining. It is like this brand new. It is this brand new thing. It's like it's not just, what does a Gen 4 blockchain look like? What does it look like when you add dual shielded and unshielded transactions to, something like Cardano? What would that look like? It's not just like, how about a more widely accepted programming language? How about, it's not just a new dev experience. It's also like, what if you take away this part of Cardano that Charles obviously hates? What if that's no longer there? And I think all this together, it's like a redo. It's like a redo of Cardano. And I don't say that pejoratively, like in a bad way, like Cardano goes away, because obviously, like we've talked about, the Night token rides on Cardano rails. The Night token is a part of Cardano, therefore Midnight is a part of Cardano. Midnight is a part of the greater Cardano ecosystem, I've been calling it. And I hope, I think, all indications are it's just going to be the first of many partner chains. The plan is that there will be many partner chains to Cardano, and they'll all be a part of the greater Cardano ecosystem. This whole concept of a layer verse that I talked about years ago. Adam Olson always brings it up in the comments. He knows the exact number of the episode where we first talked about the layer verse, but I think this is the fruition of the whole layer verse concept. It's not just, these scaling layers like, oh, here's a a roll-up layer. Here's a state channel layer. And we'll talk about Hydra a little later tonight, but it's not just that. It's also these brand new chains that aren't just about scaling. They're about something totally different than Cardano. Maybe not totally different, because I think the things that Midnight is striving for have always been the things we've strived for in Cardano, but a different approach, a totally different approach to achieve those things. And we've got not just the new technology, but also the new organization, which I think will reduce a lot of the friction in Cardano. And we have been bogged down in a big way by the friction. But now we're going to move beyond that. And so it seems Charles is really going back to the basics, starting with something people asked for on this channel just a couple of days ago. I'm sure I've seen people throughout Cardano sort of asking for the same thing, but definitely on this channel the other night, there was the question, can we have a whiteboard 2.0 for Midnight? And then we saw this. We saw this just today. Getting ready to shoot the Midnight whiteboard video. Here we go again. Look at this, the beautiful red and black. This photo looks like Midnight. This looks like this should be the setting for a Midnight whiteboard video. And I like it's, also just kind of a small whiteboard. It's not some giant, magnificent whiteboard that looks like it belongs in some throne room or something. It's a legit whiteboard like you would use, like Charles used in the first whiteboard video. And he didn't take days and days to film this thing. Then we saw this. All right, just finished the whiteboard video. The first task for our ambassadors, once the program is running, is to get it to 1 million views. Welcome to the 4th generation, everyone. So the whiteboard video is already done, already filmed. How long it actually takes to get to 1 million views, that'll be interesting. We're not exactly in a roaring, unbelievably energetic bull market right now in crypto. So depending on when this thing drops, it's going to be really interesting to see how fast it gets to 1 million views. That's going to be a good barometer. I don't think a good barometer of appetite for something like Midnight, but appetite for something like Midnight right now. It's going to be a good barometer of how much appetite there is for something like Midnight in crypto right now, because we are definitely not in that roaring bull market that everybody thought we'd be in about now. And I'm sure, that expectation was the reason why they're launching the whiteboard. They're launching Midnight right now. It's perfectly timed if things went like normal, but things certainly did not go like normal. So what I'm hoping for, and I think what I hope a lot of people are also hoping for, is that the birth of Midnight, obviously we don't want Cardano to stagnate in the background. The fear a lot of people have is that Cardano, of course, stagnates in the background because of a lot of IOG's energy is going to be on Midnight. And a lot of energy has been spent by many people explaining how that can't possibly be the case. If that were planned to be the case, then if this was like an event leading to a planned obsolescence of Cardano or something like that, they wouldn't have made the night token a Cardano native token. It would have just been a midnight native token, right? It wouldn't be riding on Cardano rails. And we wouldn't have had this gigantic allocation of all the midnight tokens to us as Cardano holders, because that effectively is just bringing everybody from Cardano, everybody who took a second to claim them, all those people from Cardano into Midnight. They wouldn't have done that if they wanted a fresh start, if it was, planned obsolescence of Cardano. Obviously, this is meant to make Cardano stronger, but it is also kind of a fresh start for Charles. I mean, we're getting the whiteboard video 2.0. Okay. Cool. Callie Chris says whiteboard 2.0. Let's go. Love hearing him lay out his vision and how all the pieces come together. He's good at it. He's really good at it. I wonder how much of it is going to be about sort of use cases for Midnight, and how much of it is just going to be like the 9 different elements in the Midnight stack, the Midnight tech stack. I mean, he's pretty much got to cover that, but I wonder if it's going to be purely that, or if it's going to be sort of like, a good 10,000 foot layman's explanation of the elements in the tech stack, along with the talk about the use cases. Because I think the talk about the use cases is what gets people's engines going. That's the part that people get excited about. They want to hear about that, how we can do some new stuff in crypto, because I think we've reached this point in crypto. And Charles's post right here is kind of harkens back to the same idea. I think we've reached this point in crypto where we started out in the early days. Crypto was a cypherpunk thing. As much as this seems trite to be talking about, because it's always mentioned in crypto, we've gotten too far from our cypherpunk ideals. We've gotten too far from the crypto thesis. We've gotten too far from the ethos of the Bitcoin white paper. But it is true, like crypto was founded on these cypherpunk ideals, right? Like, let's dethrone the banks. Let's dethrone the banks wasn't something that people joked about in the early days of crypto. That was really what people were hoping for. That's really why people were getting into crypto. That was really the thing. Like, let's create a better money that the banks don't control. This was a real thing, not just this, morale thing that lives in the background, but nobody really tries to execute on. It was like a real thing. And I think we've gone through this phase now where that sort of fell into the background. That, part of the photo, the family photo, got fuzzy. That fell out of focus. And the members of the family photo that were in focus were like, ICOs, DeFi, NFTs, meme coins, and all those things are fine and good. I'm always in favor of crypto being permissionless. So those things, if people can dream them up, they need to be able to happen. And if there's a market for them, which there obviously has been in each of those cases, then that market needs to exist, because crypto has to be permissionless as part of fulfilling this cypherpunk thesis. It has to be permissionless. So those things need to happen. But is that the real reason we're here? Are meme coins the real reason we're here? Is DeFi? I mean, DeFi is kind of necessary. DeFi is kind of necessary if you're going to be, dethroning the banks. You kind of need certain elements of DeFi. But what DeFi has turned into like the extent of the degeneracy we see, the crazy amounts of yield farming and, all these things need to exist. Like we need to have these things, but should it should it be so much of the focus? Like I think it's become something a little bit different. We'll talk a little bit about DeFi a little bit later on, but I think we've almost come full circle. When I say back to basics, I'm not just saying Charles is going back to basics by doing Whiteboard 2.0. I think all of crypto is sort of going through this fourth turning-esque phase. For us, it's only been since 2009, so certainly not 4 generations in the same sense, but everything's faster in crypto. I feel like we're almost coming full circle in crypto. Like we've done all the ICOs, we've done DeFi summer, we've done NFT cycle, we've done a meme coin cycle, we've done all these things. Maybe now it's time for us to get back to our cypherpunk ideals. Maybe now it's time when we say, hey, the way banking works, the way securities work, the way, we're still applying the Howey test, all these things, maybe it is fourth turning time. Maybe it is, I don't want to use the R word, but maybe it's revolution time, not violent, not violent guys shooting muskets at each other in the woods revolution, but I mean philosophical, intellectual revolution where we decide, hey, banking, the traditional banking system shouldn't go away. We still need it for a lot of things. We're in this transition, but we need to start moving to something newer. Banks have worked the same way since Old West outlaws were robbing banks, in dusty little towns, a couple centuries ago. And maybe that model has run its course. Maybe we need to move to something new. I think we need to move in that direction where we get back to this idea of replacing the money with something better, replacing the securities markets with something better, replacing TradFi with something better, right? And it's not just the whole let's create a more level economic playing field for the world thing. It's like even just domestically in the very advanced industrialized world, we probably deserve something better after all these years. The securities laws are literally the 1933 Securities Act and the 1934 Securities Exchange Act. Those were the years. Those aren't serial numbers. That was 1933 and 1934, right? People talk about this all the time in crypto, but it's true. We're operating off the same exact model we had all those years ago. Sure, we computerized some things, we digitized some things, but the model is operating exactly the same. You walk into a bank, you could argue fractional reserve banking works slightly differently than in the days when stagecoaches were going between dusty towns in the Old West, delivering, whatever, fiat and bars of gold, whatever it was. Fractional reserve banking, you could argue it works slightly differently, but the model is kind of still the same. We've had fractional reserve banking for a long, long time. We've had central bank manipulation of the fiat currency for a long time. Sure, we became professionals at it after the GFC. Like they got real pro at manipulating the currency. Before it was kind of subtle, kind of like, slightly weaker manipulation. Ever since we went off the gold standard, it's like they knew what they were doing when they went off the gold standard. They knew what was going to be possible, but they didn't get real good at manipulating the currency until the GFC. And then they were like, all right, boys, all in. Now it's time to be central bank degens, currency manipulation degens. That's what we became after the GFC. I think it's time for us to get back to trying to change that, right? Like, should meme coins go away? No. Should DeFi go away? No. Should NFTs go away? No. Should, these various ways we do ICOs now and don't call them ICOs, should those go away? No. All that needs to continue to exist because crypto needs to be permissionless. But should that be our whole focus? Should the number of units of cryptocurrencies locked in DeFi platforms, should that be the gold standard? No, that's not at all why any of us got into this, right? Maybe some brand new people got into it, and that's the only thing they got. Maybe that's why they got into it, but that's not what crypto was ever supposed to be about. Crypto is supposed to be about this whole creating a better system thing. And I think we're getting that point where all the DeFi stuff, it's just, I mean, it's basically a replication of TradFi. We're doing this replication of TradFi, and we'll talk a little bit later about that, how, instead of doing it exactly like TradFi, we've had to do it slightly differently to accommodate different types of protocols, those kinds of things. But replicating Wall Street is not the ultimate highest purpose of crypto. That's not why we're all here. When you read the Satoshi white paper, you didn't think like, oh man, that gets me so revved up to get in there and replicate Wall Street. That's not what you thought when you first heard about Bitcoin. That wasn't your first thought. Obviously that was some people's first thought, but not most of us. That's not why we got excited about it. When you saw the Charles whiteboard video, the original whiteboard video for Cardano, you didn't think like, oh man, this is an even better way for me to replicate TradFi. You thought, hey, it sounds like people are coming up with a better alternative to TradFi. We need to get back to that, right? We need to get back to that. All this other stuff going on in crypto, it's fine, should continue to exist, but we need to expand in new and better directions. And I think a lot of them go back to the original reason why we all got into crypto. This is why you don't hear me talking, glowingly about DeFi, even Cardano DeFi. I really like a lot of the people who run DeFi projects in Cardano. I think it's awesome. Some of the things they were able to accomplish, I think is awesome. But you don't hear me talking glowingly night after night about that, because while I think that's fine, that's not what's awesome to me. What's awesome to me is things like RealFi, right? We've talked on this channel about how that's going to be a focus of Midnight. RealFi is going to be a focus of Midnight. And sure, it is exciting when we talk about doing regular DeFi things with Bitcoin. That's exciting because of the amount of adoption. But the reason why I'm excited about the increased adoption in the greater Cardano ecosystem is so we can do the stuff like RealFi. That's what's exciting to me. And sure, is it going to involve a lot of the same mechanisms as DeFi? Is a lot of the, the machinery inside RealFi going to look like DeFi? Probably, probably. Like a lot of the systems, the rails have already been worked out. The infrastructure, how to do it has already been worked out. But it's exciting because of where it's going. Like the end result of RealFi is exciting, where, the kinds of DeFi degeneracy we've focused on in crypto for like the last, 7 years or whatever, we already know what that looks like. It's not very exciting, right? And it wasn't even exciting at the start. When I realized the extent to which we were about to just replicate existing TradFi infrastructure back at the start of, the original DeFi summer, it wasn't exciting then, and the end result hasn't been very exciting. But it feels like we're finally reaching that point where maybe we've had our fill of that a little bit. It's still going to be going on. It's still going to be expanding, but it's time for us to expand something new, something that looks a lot more like the original cypherpunk ideals, something that looks a lot more like Satoshi's original white paper, something that looks a lot more like the Cardano original whiteboard. I think we've gotten to that point. James Syracuse, how's it going? Let's see. GGS says, did not Charles say Cardano was the compute layer, Midnight the privacy layer, Bitcoin the money? I mean, yeah, I mean, we've always had these notions in Cardano of the, sort of like the settlement layer, the compute layer, these different layers. I mean, I think this is just a different way to express the whole layer verse, kind of idea. Midnight, is it going to be the privacy layer? Certainly. Is Bitcoin going to be the money? I think it's going to be one of the monies. But if you ask me, ADA is also money, right? I've paid people in ADA for things, and I've been paid in ADA for things. It is money. BindoCam says it offers something companies need in blockchain, which nothing else does. Okay. Mark says, good evening. I think V2 is going to be a good mix of tech and 10,000 foot overview. I hope so. Juan Nilo says, hi AOS, big fan of the channel. Can never express myself due to my condition being European. Is being European a condition? Maybe. Hey, you are welcome to express yourself. Juan Nilo, you are welcome to express yourself however is convenient. So feel free to express yourself here however is convenient. That is hilarious comment though. Charles is a great visionary and communicator. Such vision creates a lot of expectations. Delivering on those expectations is a tall order even for him. Yeah, that's why I think now is the time, because what Charles always promised us was Gauguin, Voltaire, and Basho, right? Smart contracts, governance, scaling, and now he's delivering privacy, right? I mean, that is a tall order from the start of Cardano to promise, governance like we've never seen before. Gauguin, which we hadn't ever seen. We hadn't seen, expressiveness in terms of smart contracts in a UTXO environment before. We've never seen governance like this before. And, scaling the Basho part still on the way, I would argue, with Laos, which is input endorsers. To me, that's sort of like the fulfillment of the Basho promise. And now we're getting privacy. So I think, yeah, I mean, it was a tall order, but I think, we're kind of well on the way to having received the benefit of that promise. So the new word in crypto is rotational. Yeah, rotation is something I love to talk about in terms of convincing people the bags will pump for sure. Pucky Hawk says, generally get the moon, you have to aim for it. So Charles is doing fine. He's an ambitious dude. There's no question. Charles Hoskinson is an ambitious dude. It's like he has these huge ambitions for Cardano, runs into organizational conflict problems, starts a whole new side of the greater Cardano ecosystem without that organization, so he can achieve his moonshot ambitions. One of the things I love about betting on the jockey instead of the horse is when you find a jockey whose psyche will not allow him to accept defeat. Charles is one of those guys. He will not accept defeat. That dude has got something to prove to the world. And if a day comes when I think he doesn't have anything left to prove to the world, that's when he will be a different type of jockey on that horse to me. So I love the fact that this dude is ambitious and he will not accept defeat. He's still got a lot to prove to the world. I think that's why a lot of us have made the bet we have on this jockey. It's time to rotate the Stargate, Cardano Universe says. There might actually be people listening to this who are too young to understand that reference, which is kind of crazy, but that's probably the case. Midnight is a beast already. It's true. It is. Feels like Charles is saying checkmate to all the haters. He kind of is. If your hate for Charles was deeply rooted in the conflict between the CF and IOG, this is kind of a checkmate. He's like, fine. The stuff I'm thinking about building now is going to be in this world that the CF is not a part of. So yeah, that's kind of true. Mr. iWebco DMS. Hello. I think I'm remembering how to pronounce your name now. I think I'm remembering how to do it. No idea. Nobody knows. Nobody knows the answer to that question. That was to Malf999's question about price. Nobody knows. I really don't think anybody knows the answer to that. Okay, yeah, this is yeah, see, here you go. You can express yourself however you like on this channel. You're free to do that. Midnight has just lit the fire. It's true. I mean, Charles is good at these whiteboard videos. When people talk about Charles, one of the first things they mention is the original whiteboard video. He's good at it. I mean, we've seen him do a million, but he's real good at it. And I think, he's probably going to spit some fire in this whiteboard video. I hope it does for Midnight what whiteboard video 1.0 did for Cardano. I hope so. So, of course, we haven't forgotten about the night mining going on. So nothing escapes Stake with Pride's attention. I think you guys probably know this. Stake with Pride sees all. There is nothing that escapes the attention. So this is kind of interesting. So Stake with Pride points out someone has mined 428,394 night. So Stake with Pride picked this up in the Midnight Discord channel. P.S. The challenge difficulty is extremely high now. I think all of you mining probably noticed this. They were mining early on in easy mode, and he's got a screenshot here. 428,394. I'm guessing not many people on this channel. If anybody on this channel has mined more than that somehow, they'll probably just stay quiet about it. They probably won't bring that to everybody's attention. But how's everybody doing? I'm more than happy to say today my mining is nothing impressive. It's probably very similar to a lot of other people, but I think through all my browser mining, I think I crossed like the 2,000 mark today. So that's probably pretty average for a lot of people. I was running that mainly on like two laptops, with a couple browsers each, and just kind of staying on top of it. But how's everybody else doing? What are your numbers looking like for those who don't mind saying? Don't feel obligated to say, but how are everybody's numbers on the mining doing? I'm curious how much people have mined, and if it's a crazy large number, please specify that it wasn't all just browser mining. I have tried out. Also, let me know if people are using Patty and Paul's bot mining system. I actually did try it out, and I think I mined like, kind of a small amount of night just to try it out. I think I mined like 50 night or something using their bot system. Just check it out. But the 2,000 that I mined were all browser. So let's see. Uh, let's see. Puckyhawk says, I just decided not to mine. Yeah, I think that is, I think a lot of people probably make the same decision because the difficulty went so high. Malf 999 says, I was hearing some rumor that Cardano was dead. Midnight might shine, but that too not promised. Is it true? No, I think that's what we're talking about here. I think Cardano is definitely not dead. Binocam says, based on what he said in Discord the other day, the mining is contributing to the computational basis Merkle stuff for Midnight. Yeah, okay, so this is something we should mention at this point. So the Midnight Foundation and Charles pointed out that the amount of mining that has already happened in the scavenger mine exceeds the total amount of SHA-256 mining in terms of hash power in the first like several years of Bitcoin. It's amazing. It's amazing. That's a very nice metric they'll be able to kind of bandy about to show, how insane Midnight is. So Crypto Invasion says 2 laptops, 7K. Ooh, impressive. Yeah, you got a lot more than I did. How many browsers are you talking about? How many browsers does that require? Rulo 13 says 1K single browser. Yeah, that's more like me. Yeah, 750 single browser. Yeah. Blue Mammal says, I will never tell. Yeah, I have a feeling there's a lot of people. There are definitely people in here who have mined crazy amounts, and they're the ones who are not going to say. Bindocam says, just running my desktop, sitting around 1K on each. Yeah, that's about what I've hit. I'm like on 95% of my mining has been on 2 laptops, and I'm at 2,000, so about the same. Mission Zambia says Cardano can't be killed. Yeah, it was made to not be killable. So, and it can't, if Night is to function, it can't die because Night runs on Cardano. Cardano Universe says, if I get 2,000, I will be fine with that. This is my first time mining. Is TVL going to blow up? I don't know. I don't know about that part, Blue Mammal. I don't know. It depends on how DeFi and RealFi are structured on Midnight. Although Charles seems very keen to have TVL blow up. I myself, not that my opinion, matters in the same way, but I myself am not so crazy about TVL. I think it's a horrible metric because I want freedom, not being locked up. Being locked up is not something I think people should aspire to. I think freedom is something we should aspire to. So I'm not crazy about TVL. I'm like, to hell with TVL. I'll go for total value. Somebody came up with a better acronym. They had a better phrase that TVL could also be the acronym for. I can't remember what it was. I always liked total value liberated, but like a week or two ago, somebody on this channel in these comments came up with a much better name for that. Okay, Mark Going has 4,000 total, 1,500 browser, not bad. Puckyox says, my new strategy is wait for Midnight to release, then wait for it to skyrocket, tank, and then buy more. Based on past airdrops, we're mining now, so it's not technically an airdrop, not totally an airdrop, but this has not been a bad strategy. In the past, there have been historical instances where this was a great strategy. Okay, Crypto Invasion says 1 laptop, 4 browsers. second laptop, 4 browsers with 3 in virtual machine. Okay, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. 200,000 night. You make me sick. Who said 200,000 night? Who said they have 200,000 night? I'm scrolling through the comments. I didn't see that somebody said 200,000 night. Bindo Cam says, I'll toss some of my mining rewards in DeFi just to help support the ecosystem, but nobody touching my ADA. Yeah, I mean, that could happen. That could happen. I mean, if people, that could happen, that people might be, it's possible that, some percentage of people will be more open to throwing their night tokens in DeFi. I guess it depends on how well the whole thing goes with Dust. I guess it depends on how things go with Dust, how much people are willing to risk their night. So, but yeah, that's probably good for the ecosystem. Okay. Okay, here's something interesting. This is sort of another addition to our various ways to mine night for the people who are still interested in mining. So here's a whole thread, and apparently this poster did a video. I believe I saw this because Paul pointed out this post. But this person has a whole video on how two different methods to mine night with your cell phone. So for people who, for whatever reason, haven't been willing to mine night with a laptop or a desktop, and who have just been waiting for a way to mine night with your cell phone, I have no idea how well this will work going forward. Looks like this was posted like a day ago. I have no idea how effective this will be, but there you go. If you wanted someone to make a video about how to mine night with your cell phone, this person is purporting to have done exactly that. Okay. We have some more news. So yesterday we said, hey, the House was going to vote to reopen the government tomorrow afternoon. That was today, this afternoon, and they did in fact vote. Here is the Speaker of the House announcing that they passed that vote to reopen the government. And pretty soon we saw this from the White House. They said, we are so back, because as you know, it has to go to the president's desk. And it is not a hard guess to guess whether or not the president signed that bill to reopen the government. President Trump probably signed that bill faster than he's ever signed any bill. President Trump signs a bill to officially reopen the government, ending the shutdown. So we are back in business. The government has opened back up. And I can only guess. I mean, things are not fantastic. Things are not all rainbows and cookies in crypto land. So I'm going to go ahead and say this is probably good for crypto. You never know. Crypto's a wild place. We never know what's going to happen, but I'm going to go ahead and guess this is probably good for crypto. Let's see. Cardano Universe says, nope, just sticking with old browsers. James Syracuse says, I missed out on 50K. So if it's like 50 cents, I'm going to be hurt, but I'm thinking 50 cents, hope not, because I'm still getting a decent amount. Okay, Mr. iWebCode DMS says, I was contacted today about longing my night tokens for XRP. What is you followed up with a complete scam. Yeah, it sounds like a scam. So James Syracuse, there is what are they calling it? There's another thing that happens after the scavenger mine where people will have a second chance. I forget what the name of that phase of the glacier drop is, but if you didn't claim in the first phase, there's a second chance after the scavenger mine to go back and put in a claim for some fraction of your original allocation. It's in the white paper. You can read about it in the white paper, and that phase is called, I'm blanking on it. Somebody will remember in the comments. Somebody will remember what that's called. But there is another phase where you can go back and try to claim some fraction of your original allocation. Rulo says, buy it all from the Sol people after they dump. Yeah, there's going to be some dumping. There's going to be people who claimed their midnight tokens. from other ecosystems. I'm sure I'm guessing, I shouldn't even say I'm sure. I'm guessing the amount of dumping from certain other ecosystems is going to be much higher than Cardano people. But who knows? We'll see. We'll see. What crypto's a wild place. Let's see. Cardano Universe says, I decided to stick with Midnight's old mining app and not go through the hoops on Paul's new website, Paul and Patty's new website, and code downloads. Mr. iWebCode DMS says, selling my night. I think a lot of people will. Yep. Lost and Found. That's right. Mission Zambia. Thank you for that. It is called the Lost and Found phase. That's right. So you can, okay, during Lost and Found, if my recollection of the white paper is correct, you can claim a portion of your original allocation. There's some fractional amount you can still claim. And people, yeah, I know everybody wants to speculate on price right now. It's all pure speculation. We don't know. No one knows what the amount's going to be. It's all speculation, guys. Okay, what is not speculation is that we have a much better SEC. The SEC we have right now is much better than the Gensler SEC. Pretty much 0 people in crypto are missing the Gensler SEC. We're going to talk about why. Blue Mammal says, let's say hypothetically, if you accumulated a lot more ADA after the glacier drop, can you claim that in the Lost and Found, asking for a friend? I believe that is not the intention. I believe that is not the way that is planned. I think the snapshot was the snapshot, and the amount you had in the snapshot is it. I think that's it. So as far as I understand, maybe somebody else can correct me, but that's what I understand. So our new SEC chair is not named Gary Gensler. He is named Paul Atkins. And he released a little paper all about this thing they're calling at the SEC Project Crypto. And if Gary Gensler had dropped something called Project Crypto, it would probably involve, like guys with guns showing up at our houses, asking us where our ledgers are or something like that. That's what I would assume. If it was something called Project Crypto, I would just be assuming that would happen the next day. But no, we got Paul Atkins Project Crypto, and it's much better. It looks like this. Here's his rundown of what Project Crypto looks like. His speech was called The Securities and Exchange Commission's Approach to Digital Assets Inside Project Crypto. So he gave this speech. I'm not sure if it was yesterday or today, but they released it on the SEC website today. You can see it. And he talks about a lot of the things I think we've been feeling in crypto. A decade of uncertainty. Yes, we have been subjected to a decade of uncertainty. And he mentions, we're not going to be like a rubber stamp, pushover SEC. There are still certain core principles in securities law. First, that a stock is still a stock, whether it is a paper certificate, an entry in a DTCC account, or represented by a token on a public blockchain. A bond does not stop being a bond because its payment streams are tracked using smart contracts. Securities, however represented, remain securities. That is the easy part. So for the people who have these wild delusions that, NVIDIA stock is going to end up on the blockchain and it'll be completely unregulated just because it's on the blockchain, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. He's telling you right now, that's not what's going to happen. He also says economic reality trumps labels. Calling something a token or an NFT does not exempt it from the current securities laws. So he's letting you know, like, hey, this doesn't mean you can just, create synthetic securities and trade them around without being things like securities broker dealers and, doing all the compliance on that side. However, if we're talking about real crypto, not synthetic securities, it's a different story. He has a taxonomy for tokens. First, he says there are these things called digital commodities or network tokens. And he's like, those are not securities. He says, in my opinion, digital commodities or network tokens are, in my opinion, not securities. These assets are intrinsically linked to and derive their value from a programmatic operation of a crypto system that is functional and decentralized. Notice he's latching on to a lot of the terminology we saw previously in the legislation. We've talked about all the different iterations of the legislation. We had the Fit 21 Act, various things proposed by our allies in Congress, like Senators Gillibrand and Lummis. And, a lot of the focus was on functional decentralized blockchains. And here he's saying, if this is a crypto asset that's intrinsically linked to a functional and decentralized blockchain. You notice he's using this intrinsically linked language. This was the language from the Clarity Act. We covered that a couple nights ago. I believe this is the exact language from the Clarity Act. He's saying those are not securities. This is very open-ended. They should be intrinsically linked to a functional and decentralized blockchain. Functional and decentralized is the language, I believe, from the early proposals by Lummis and Gillibrand. And I think that's right. It doesn't need to be functional and decentralized. What is decentralized is going to be interesting. And only the stricter they get on that part, only favors Cardano. I think you all realize that. He says, second, digital collectibles, in my opinion, are also not securities. These are, things that are used as, may represent or convey rights to artwork, music, videos, trading cards, in-game items, or digital representations or references to internet memes. So your skins for your MP5 in your favorite first-person shooter, he's even including those. You're good to go. Your trading cards, your music, your videos, all those things. He's good with all of it, not securities. Digital tools, even. He had this third category. I haven't seen people talk about this as much. He's like, these are also not securities. These are things like memberships, tickets, credentials, title instruments, or identity badges. These are not securities. And guess what? The piece that is going to be real interesting, that's a much bigger, that's a very big piece, a very interesting and big piece, is this one, title instruments. Title instruments. When we start talking about that, you can start talking about real estate and, revolutionizing the county recorders and all those kind of things. Identity badges also, also a thing, but that title instrument one, that's a pretty big one. That's a pretty big one to throw in this digital tools category. And then he says there's this final category, tokenized securities. So, for you guys out there creating synthetic NVIDIA, units of stock, he's like, yeah, that's always been a security, always going to be a security. We're not going to let you call that crypto and say you're just free to do whatever you want with that one. So this is a really big deal. This is what it should have been all along. I think this approach is great. Hits the nail on the head. You've got a couple different things that can end up being called crypto. One of them has never really been crypto, has always been something that the SEC should fall within the SEC's remit, and the SEC should be regulating one of them, right? Your synthetic NVIDIA. The rest of them, this is crypto. No reason for the SEC to be involved. They shouldn't be involved with this at all. Sure, the top one, to the extent it is a digital commodity, sure. CFTC can come up with some new regulatory regime for that one. That's great. And maybe some things will, maybe when they're first launched, if they're launched in some kind of ICO, maybe at first they are securities and they graduate to being digital commodities through the kind of framework that's been described in the FIT21 bill and the other bills and the Clarity Act. Maybe we have that, but I think this is pretty much right. This is what we needed all along. This is exactly what we needed from an SEC. Okay. Joe Davidson, thank you for making it. I'm happy you're here. I appreciate you making it. Thank you. Everyone is talking about night, but forgetting about dust. Yeah, people are not talking too much about the dust generation and what that's going to mean. People are not paying much attention to that. I agree. Do you think the massive amount of rent per hour server costs will be the reason the night token price drops drastically on thaw because of recuperating costs? Yeah, I mean, this has always been a thing with mining. In this case, it's server costs that people are going to be trying to recoup. In the past with ASIC mining, it's like the miners were constantly selling for energy, to buy new ASICs to keep themselves competitive. A lot of different reasons they were, selling constantly. But a lot of the sell pressure in proof of work blockchains has always been the miners having to sell just to fund their operations. So it'll be no different here. The cool thing here is that it ends. So we won't have perma miners in night. Maybe someday if they reincorporate Minotaur, I feel like this is Minotaur we're doing right now. This is kind of a form of Minotaur. But, who knows, down the road, they might reincorporate Minotaur and we have mining again. But for now, this ends in, what is it now, 6-7 days? So that's the cool part. Yeah, sure. People will sell some night to recoup their server costs for sure. That'll happen. But I think it'll be a one-time event. So, I mean, okay, that's a lie. We do have the 4 tranches of 25%. Maybe some portion of the selling after each of those tranches drops is going to be related to this, but it's not something that's going to go on for years like it has in Bitcoin. Yep, James Syracuse is agreeing. Snapshot didn't include rewards addresses. I actually don't know about this. I actually don't know about this. This is an interesting issue. Can somebody confirm that? I actually don't know about that. The night tokens will drop on thaw because of selling. There will certainly be selling. Anytime there's ever been an airdrop of any type, any significant airdrop of any type, there has been selling. You give people free stuff, there's going to be selling. If I walked around and gave a lawnmower to everybody in my neighborhood, there would be a glut of lawnmowers on the market, on Facebook Marketplace or something. There'd be a ton of lawnmowers. So yeah, I think it's just, supply and demand dynamics. Okay, here is us getting back to that original cypherpunk ethos again. Here is a post by the Charms account. Charms, I need to learn more about Charms because their social media posts are pretty good. The Charms people are putting up some pretty good social media posts, and this is one of them. Huge. Nigel Farage calls to form a Bitcoin digital reserve if elected. Unlike paper money, Bitcoin cannot be printed into worthlessness. This has always been the lore kind of in Bitcoin, that once the first domino fell, then all the other dominoes would start falling. You could argue the first domino was El Salvador, Nayib Bukele. That was the first domino, but now we're seeing a lot of interest, internationally in Bitcoin reserves. So hopefully that's true. I think it's good for all of crypto if that's actually true. Joe Davidson says the problem with the selling of the night to cover server costs is the people running those servers are getting the bulk compared to the regular one or two browser miners. I'm a one address myself. Yep, that's true. They're out competing us for sure. Last Gambit, evening. Glad you're here. Mission Zabby says, I also heard that any unclaimed ADA staking rewards were not counted in the snapshot. When you say unclaimed, do you mean not like what do you mean by unclaimed? Let me ask you that question. What do you mean by unclaimed ADA staking rewards? Let's if you can clarify what you mean by that, just so I can understand what you're saying. Here's some more of this original. Here's what I'm talking about. Back to basics. This post says, thank you, Medici Roasting plus Square. I watched as a fine senator bought her first coffee with Satoshis. Easy peasy. Time for that de minimis exception. I agree with all of this. And this is Senator Cynthia Lummis, who we were just talking about, buying coffee with Bitcoin, right? Square, launched, what did they launch today? Like Lightning or something like that. Square made it easier to make purchases like this, but what doesn't make it easier is the lack of a de minimis exception, which is something that Cynthia Lummis says she would like to see happen. Me too. We need that because theoretically, Cynthia Lummis is going to have to tell the IRS whether her Bitcoin was worth more or less money when she bought this coffee versus when she acquired it. That's actually going to have to be like a line item in her taxes when she files her taxes. That is not the way to get people to use Bitcoin with coffee. That's a huge drawback. So hopefully she gets that de minimis exception one day. I don't know. That's kind of a tough sell. It's kind of a tough sell, I think, in this Congress. They're so far from being able to understand the necessity of that. Okay, still in the rewards address. You're saying if it's still in the rewards address and not withdrawn, it wasn't counted. Okay, I wasn't aware of that. Thank you for letting me know. I was not aware of that. That would be, I'm sure that would make people very sad if they had a huge amount in their rewards address that had not been withdrawn. Probably very sad about that. I think a lot of people just withdraw the second it drops, but if you had a huge amount in your rewards address and it was not counted, that would definitely suck. D.U says it would have been lovely if midnight allocations accounted for entirety of our wallet holdings. We all had more than just ADA, but getting some for our ADA was very nice indeed. Yeah, so this is I get both sides of this argument. For the people who invested heavily in CNTs, of course, they would want the CNTs to count as well. But there's a there's a big diversity of CNTs. There's a lot of different types of CNTs. So there's this line drawing exercise. It's like what CNT should count and how much should they count, right? Because you've got a lot of CNTs that have, a small number of holders, and it's actually like kind of hard to value them. It's sort of like you run into this the mental exercise. It's like people always talk about this, right, when they're trying to explain this phenomenon. Imagine an island, right? The island has 6 parcels on it. The island has 6 parcels on it, right? Or let's say 100 parcels. The island, it's an exclusive island in the Caribbean, has 100 parcels on it, right? All owned by different people. Then none of them want to sell. Then finally, one of them decides to sell. None of the parcels are on the market, so he sells his one parcel for a very high price because his is the only one for sale, and 1 million people want to move to this very exclusive island. So he sells his one of the 100 parcels for $1 million, right? Based on that, you would say that the market cap for those parcels on the island is 100 million. But so you could say each one of those 100 is worth $1 million. But if that is perceived to be the case, 10 of those 100 people might put their parcels on the market. And then all of a sudden, because there's 10 for sale and not just one, they're not going to sell for $1 million. So was the market cap of those parcels ever really 100 million? Or is the market cap just an illusion because 0 were for sale, then 1 was for sale? But then if society accepts that market cap, a whole bunch more were for sale, and you could never have really, that market cap was never real. We get a little bit of that with, very low distribution CNTs, right? It's like, how do you determine what the market cap really is when they're a little bit illiquid? So there's like practical problems to all that. You get what I'm saying? Thoughts on the new Steam console jailbreaks for mining? Oh, I don't know anything about this because I don't play Steam, so I don't know. Joe David says, if they counted CNTs and all my Infinity Rising NFTs would have made me a knight. Well, yeah, I mean, if you counted CNFTs along with regular CNTs, along with fungible CNTs, there's a lot of practical issues to like how to decide what counts as what. There would have been a lot of fighting, a lot of conflict over how to do that, I think. Last Gambit says, socials are hilarious. Seems like people were expecting instant parabolic moons after government shutdowns. This highlights why so many people in the space are just not prepared. Yeah, I mean, government shutdown ending is probably not bad for us, but it's definitely not going to be, it definitely does not seem like it's going to be insta moon. I don't think people are going to go from nothing to moon Lambos tomorrow. D.U says, yes, a lot of Cardano people would have benefited a lot if they accounted for our total wallet's value. Yeah. Yeah, there's the liquidity problem. The reopening is the preamble because the laws still need to be done. True, we still got to pass a lot of laws. Mainly the market structure bill's got to pass for sure. Okay, here's another post, also from somebody associated with Charms. So just so everybody knows, I don't have anything to do with Charms or anything like that. I'm just interested because they make really good. I'm interested in what they're doing. I don't know anything about it yet. I need to do some reading, but they also make really good posts on X lately. So this is interesting. Delta DeFi is awesome. Just tried the beta. Swapped ADA into USDM, back into ADA, and back into USDM within a minute at near zero cost. Looks like Cardano can scale. In fact, order books work. Hydra works. So a lot of you know Delta DeFi, and I think it was Zambia, Mission Zambia brought this up. Delta DeFi is the first Hydra DEX on Cardano, and it's launching right now during the Cardano Summit 2025. It is on mainnet. So we have We finally have. People ask for years, when are we going to see a Hydra DApp on mainnet? Here you go. This is it. We've now got an order book DEX on mainnet that is using Hydra, using the Hydra, which is the state channel in Cardano. So this is really interesting to me because people assume DEXs in crypto need to be automated market makers. They need to be AMAs, with the two pools and the people suffering impermanent loss and all that business that we're also accustomed to. But the very first DEX in Cardano was an order book DEX. The reason why we see AMMs in the EVM world and in crypto generally is because in the account balance world, it's much more practical to have AMMs than to have order books. People always try to point out, you could technically, because the EVM is basically Turing complete, you could program whatever you want. You could have order books in the EVM, but it's not very practical because of the way gas fees work, and also because of the clogging of the network that would happen if you had all these orders living in the order book that had to constantly be there and part of the kind of global state of the entire network. So in the EVM world, we ended up with a whole bunch, I asked AI today what it thought the share of AMMs in the account balance world was, and the answer was like probably in excess of 95%, just because it's much more practical to have AMMs in the account balance world. But in the EUTXO world, the same is not true. It's pretty practical to have order books, right? People aren't used to it because it doesn't really happen in the EVM world, but it is something that's practical in the Cardano world. And in fact, our very first DEX was an order book DEX. I actually prefer the way order books work to the way automated market makers work. And what I think a lot of people are realizing here with the launch of Delta DeFi is that what's being pointed out by a lot of people is that the vast majority of trading in crypto is done on centralized exchanges, right? So you have to ask the question, why is it that people are so willing to trade on centralized exchanges? And I believe that a big part of it is because order books are a lot easier to understand for people than AMMs, right? It's pretty easy if you put a limit order into an order book, it's pretty easy to understand what's going on there. If you make a market order that gets executed immediately, it's pretty easy to understand what happens because you can see the order book right there, and you see the position your market order got executed against. It's pretty easy to understand what's going on. So if the goal is to get people off these centralized exchanges and get them to start using DEXs, there's an argument that the way to do that is to have more order books and less AMMs, because that's going to be more familiar to them and it's a little bit easier to understand. Cardano in the EUTXO world is the place where you can do that. You can have more order books and less AMMs, even though that's not what people like to do, because people like all of on the supply side of that, the liquidity side of that, people like all the yield farming and that kind of stuff, holders of crypto. So there's reasons why AMMs are popular. But if we're trying to move that huge bulk of the trading that actually does not happen in DEXs, the huge bulk of the trading happens on centralized exchanges because it's easy and intuitive and people actually understand what's going on. If we want to move some of that off the centralized exchanges and onto DEXs, maybe the way to do it is to have more order books and fewer of these AMMs. And this has the added benefit of I don't know anything about this platform. I don't know who they are. I don't know what they're doing, except that they have an order book DEX that is running on Hydra. And this poster says they did some trades at near zero cost, right? Which is what Hydra is intended to do. And man, if we want to get people off those centralized exchanges and onto DEXs, maybe this is the way and not so much AMMs, because AMMs have been around for a while now. We've had Uniswap for a long time, and people just keep using the centralized exchanges. They're happy to use Binance, Kraken, and Coinbase. And, comparatively, not many of them actually move onto DEXs. They just stay in there. They just do their stuff in there. So maybe this is a better approach to answer that question. Joe David says, I feel like each CNFT could be weighted as one night token. That way you could argue at least about 1 ADA had to be used to get that NFT into your wallet. I mean, that's the problem, how you would weight those assets. That would have been, honestly, that would have been like a nightmare trying to figure out how to do that. And everybody would have been mad because everybody would have wanted their CNT bags to be weighted more heavily. Joe Davidson, you hit 1,000 night. Okay, that's pretty good. Doesn't Hydra make a DEX more centralized? Don't you have a limit to the participants in a head? So yeah, I mean, state channels are, by their nature, state channels are, a different compromise on the legs of the trilemma between decentralization and scaling for sure. They're meant to be a different compromise. So yeah, you're right. You're right. It's a different compromise on those two legs of the trilemma. Charles posted that you cannot freeze people's funds on Cardano. Yeah, I think I actually had that in the list at some point here. Yeah, here you go. Just a brief reminder that no one can freeze your funds on Cardano or Midnight. And if you go into this document he's citing, the document points out that you can freeze funds on, they cite a couple different blockchains, including, I believe, Sui and Aptos. This is a big deal. This is one of those things that I think is part of the original ethos of crypto. Like, you shouldn't be able to freeze your funds on a real blockchain. If it's a real blockchain, it should be permissionless and it should be censorship resistant. When you talk about freezing your funds, this is the censorship. You're censoring the transaction when that person wants to move their funds. Freezing your funds is the censorship that wasn't supposed to be able to happen on true blockchains. So I agree with that. Last Gambit says, I've transformed into my final form. I'm no longer a Cardano bull. I'm a Cardano Kraken. Totally skipped well. Nice. Okay. Pucky Hawk says, I feel called out. Laugh out loud. Kraken is what I use. I mean, you use it because you're rational, right? You're rational. You look at the possibility of using AMMs, and you look at the convenience of using Kraken, and you choose Kraken. I think it's probably a rational decision on a lot of people's parts. They're like, I can just hit this button and I can do whatever trades I want. Sure, I'm paying larger fees generally in the centralized exchange context, but it's easier. It's easier, and you understand what's going on. You don't have to understand, the vagaries of the comparative vagaries of an AMM. So I think it's actually like rational. I don't think it's dumb. I think you can rationally make the decision that's better. Last Gambit says that's actually a good market in my opinion. Oh, have you used it? Have you used Delta DeFi? Is that what you're saying? BindoCam says BindoCam does not want to be censored. BindoCam wants to be able to send whatever coin they want wherever. Cardano Universe says that's why I don't like banks. Censorship. Pucky Hawk says, well, I'm Kraken Pro. The fees are nothing usually because I don't buy more than I should. Okay, fair enough. Crypto Invasion says $300 fees to make a large trade on MinSwap isn't it? Last Gambit says I was referring to Kraken. Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, I agree. You can look at the possibility of using a DEX or using a centralized exchange and decide that the balance of benefits and burdens goes in the direction of the centralized exchange. That's why we don't have more. That's why the centralized exchanges are winning. They are winning. I think that's exactly why. So okay. So here's the actual presser. Here's the presser that Charles was talking about. As far as the freezing, this censorship that's being referenced in this article, Bybit's Lazarus Security Lab reveals hidden fund freezing functions across 16 major blockchains. I don't know how hidden they were. I think we all kind of knew, they point out that, VeChain, we knew back in 2019, they froze funds after a $6.6 million breach. Sui froze 162 million in stolen assets after the Cetus hack. Aptos later added blacklisting functions following the incident. BNB chain used hard-coded blacklist to contain a 570 million bridge exploit. Cosmos's modular account design may enable similar interventions in the future. I mean, there's a lot of blockchains that just kind of made this decision that they didn't want to do the permissionless, no censorship thing. So, of course, somebody pointed out, hey, Charles, wasn't this also your post? This is a post from ways back when we were trying to do the Wyoming stablecoin thing, and we didn't get it. And one of the issues was you couldn't freeze assets on Cardano. So Charles pointed out, actually, while it's not a part, the point is it's not a part of native base layer assets living on the native base layer, you can, in fact, create smart contracts in Cardano that have assets living inside them that can be frozen. So you can create a smart, oh yeah, Charles says it right here, actually. If you use, I hadn't read this. If you use a smart contract to do it for a user issued asset, then that's a different story. No one can freeze data. These chains have protocol level freezing. That's the difference. Base layer protocol based freezing is different than being expressive enough to be able to create a smart contract that does the same. Like there's no protocol level rule in Cardano that you can't create a smart contract to do this, right? Which should be pretty obvious to people that, a protocol as expressive as Cardano, which is not as expressive as some other ecosystems, but that's as expressive as Cardano is obviously going to allow you to create a smart contract that does that. Pucky Hawk, the upside is Kraken has a nearly spotless track record. I'm a big fan of Kraken and its founder. I'm also a big fan of Armstrong over at Coinbase. So I like these guys. I think they have made great contributions to the crypto space. There's also a question though, when you say they have a near spotless track record, we don't actually know the extent to which things have happened behind the curtains at these centralized exchanges, right? If you ask me the question, and I'm not talking about any particular exchange here, but if you ask me the question, have exchanges had hacks, just exchanges writ large, have there been exchanges, centralized exchanges that have had hacks, covered the losses with funds they had access to, funds that were rightfully theirs, just covered the losses, and then we never found out about the hack? If you ask me, has that ever happened at a centralized exchange? I'm going to go ahead and say, yes, that's happened. So we don't really know. What I'm trying to say is we don't really know the track record of all these exchanges in terms of hacks, because if they suffered hacks and they were able to cover the losses, we wouldn't necessarily find out about it. I have not seen it. Have I seen the CF intro at the summit? I've not seen it. Yep. People like Kraken. Yep. Jesse Powell is a man. He is definitely a dude who, in a lot of ways, I've seen a lot. There have been a lot of times over the years when he seemed like one of the few dudes who was sticking to the cypherpunk thing. That is for sure. He's one of those guys for sure. He's one of those guys among the centralized exchange guys. He seems like one of the guys who, in a lot of cases, has stuck more to those ideals than maybe some others. I also respect Armstrong though over there, and I also respect CZ for some of the things he's done. Although very different approach than somebody like Jesse Powell for sure. Cardano Universe says Binance is one. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, Binance. If you ask me, have there ever been hacks at Binance? Who knows? Who knows? Who knows? So here's something non-crypto that I think will actually affect all of us. Because I think if you watch this channel, probably many of you spend time on Cardano X, the part of x.com where we discuss Cardano. So this might affect all of us in a pretty good way. I hope if we can take Elon at his word here. He says by next month, Grok will literally look at and understand all 100 million X posts per day, including images and video, no matter how small the account, and recommend content to users based on the intrinsic quality of the content itself. This is only possible with advanced AI using a lot of GPUs and will massively improve the quality of everyone's feed. You can have whatever opinion you want of Elon Musk, but I believe him when he says this here. I believe this is what he's expecting. Whether or not it turns out exactly like he thinks, who knows? But when he says this, I get a little bit excited because I would like for there to be this AI arbiter who's deciding on the quality of my posts on X and, a lot of your posts on X. And, other than just this like vague amorphous algorithm, that nobody really understands. I know at one point X was like posting their algorithm so people could try to understand it. It seemed like still nobody understood how things were getting ranked. I like the idea of Grok being the arbiter who tries to determine the intrinsic quality of the posts and then feeds them to me that way. So I'm kind of excited about this. Is CF Gerard MMA fighter? No, I do not believe. I do not believe that was a reference there. Pucky Hawk says Super Grok is really smart. It's an actually good use case for AI for once. Yep, I agree with that. I'm happy to let. I think I'm looking forward to an improvement in Grok. Looking at my posts and deciding if they're good or not versus whatever the algorithm has always been on these types of sites. Lovey says, hi, AOS, bit late, but we'll catch the start later. Looks like Cardano was in a prime position for the clarity stuff. Yeah, Cardano was engineered to pass the kinds of tests in the Clarity Act, I think. You never know, though. They could surprise us. Those are long documents, so there could be stuff in there we're not seeing. Pucky Hawk says, Super Grok is maybe the most uncensored AI. The rest are sanitized and generic. That's for sure. That's for sure. It seems to me like Super Grok is definitely the most uncensored, which has been, at times that has been a bit of a train wreck. And the people who, are anti-Elon or anti-X, anti-Elon's version of X, they had a field day when Grok got a little unhinged. We don't have to go back over what was going on, but Grok, something happened with Grok one night and it got a little crazy on X for sure. And, people on the other side of the political spectrum from Elon definitely made a lot of hay over that one. But yeah, I think this is good. The government is back open as we expected. Ever since Sunday when they struck that deal, the government's back open. Charles is going full bore on Midnight. Midnight is definitely some kind of rebirth of Cardano. What that means in the future, we don't really know. I hope what it means is I hope it's part of this bigger trend, this bigger thing that almost feels like a fourth turning kind of thing where we've already gone through the cycle and all this other stuff. There will be more new novel cycles in crypto, more new novel trends. There'll be stuff that pops up and suddenly becomes super popular at, a casino gambling level. But I hope we're at this point in the cycle where we can get back to basics, not just the launch of Midnight, feeling like getting back to the basics that brought us all into Cardano, but crypto as a whole, getting away from the silly degen casino stuff and getting back to what crypto was supposed to be about all along. But I hope everybody is having a great week. I hope you're surviving. We're like halfway through the week. Hope you survived the week so far. You're going to have a good rest of the week. I hope you're looking forward to a great weekend. And I will talk to everybody soon.